Bills Live. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you, and pleased to be joined now by ESPN NFL analyst and co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show, also a former Bills safety back in 2006 and 7-year NFL veteran, Matt Bowen, joining us from the Windy City, or nearby anyway.
Hey, Matt.
Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
Good. So I want to start here because the general consensus going into the draft was, absent a quarterback class of star power, that this was going to be a pass rusher draft. And while that was certainly the case in round one, and probably over a good portion of day two as well, I'm going to submit this to you, Matt. First three rounds of the draft, 17 pass rushers come off the board in the first three rounds. There were 20 receivers in the first three rounds. So people can talk about pass rushers all they want. End of the draft, Matt, 26 pass rushers go, 28 receivers drafted. What is that the headline of this draft? Because receivers have reshaped the market this offseason, and now you see 28 kids go off the board, 20 in the first three rounds.
And I'll tell you what, I think that's going to continue. When you look at the last couple classes and what we're projecting for next year and the year after that, the talent at wide receiver is really deep. It starts younger. You know, you guys know I coached at the high school level here in Chicago, and passing offenses have exploded in high school. A lot of spreads, a lot of trips to the field. You're seeing more pro and college style concepts in the high school game. And high school receivers are catching passes, a lot of passes, a lot different than when we were all in high school running split back veer, right? So everything has exploded. It transitions to the college level. You look at the college level too, a place like Alabama, you're running pro style routes at Alabama. A lot of colleges, you can say that about that. And then these receivers come to the NFL with more pro ready traits, in my opinion, that can play right away. As you guys know, in Buffalo, most NFL offenses right now operate with 3 wide receivers on the field. That's their base package. So you need 3 wide receivers there. You need 5 on your roster. You need a couple who can play special teams for you as well. And I think it's going to continue that way as we progress through future draft years, because the talent is so deep and the development is so much more pro ready.
How long is it going to be before corner catches up to it? Because now if you look at the supply and demand, corners should be way outstripping wide receivers. But we still see Tyreek Hill sign a $30 million contract. There isn't a cornerback within shouting distance of that, although there's some well-paid ones. Corners are going to be at a premium because there are fewer of them that can really play at that level.
No, I agree with that. And I tell young kids all the time, if you have natural ball skills and you have good top-end speed, work on developing your footwork to play backwards, right? Because then you turn, in terms of recruiting, in terms of playing college, in terms of getting drafted, like you said, Steve, there is going to be a more demand for corners, especially corners who have the long frames that can impact the ball at the point of attack, guys at the top end speed to recover down the field, and guys who have the hips or the fluid movement traits to open and run with wide receivers to open and squeeze inside. And I think you saw in this draft too, Steve, the importance of the safety position as well. You saw a lot of safeties drafted in day 1 and day 2 when you put that group together, because you can look here in Buffalo, and I've said this all the time throughout the draft process. If I'm building a secondary right now, the model for me in terms of having a safety with multi-dimensional traits is looking at the Buffalo Bills. That's how I want to build my defense. I want Micah Hyde and I want Jordan Poyer in my secondary because they're interchangeable. They can both cover. They can rotate to the post. They can spin down and play in the box. They can blitz and they can match up the tight ends. And most importantly, they tackle and they play with urgency. And you saw some safeties. I went through this class. Jaquan Brisker went to the Bears. Brian Cook from Cincinnati, who went to Kansas City. Those are the type of safeties I think that the NFL really wants now too, because they have that versatility, because they have to impact the passing game as well.
So let's begin. And speaking of corners with length, Kaiir Elam, Buffalo's top pick. I mean, Brandon Beane told us he was the last guy they had in round 1 with a first-round grade, so that's why they went up 2 spots, because they didn't want to lose him. You know how much McDermott puts emphasis on run support with his corners. It looks like he can do that. I'm impressed that he's already mastered how to effectively use his length. He's got that reach-around move in trail technique. I mean, he seems like a pretty advanced guy for a 21-year-old kid.
Yeah, and ultra competitive and plays with an aggressive style. You want someone who's physical, has the coverage traits, but ultimately someone who will challenge wide receivers. Because that's what you're going to get in this league every Sunday when you play. And I like to tape on Elam. He has traits. You know, when you talk about traits at the cornerback position, you mentioned some of them right there, Chris. He's 6'2". He's got sub 4.4 speed. He can play press. He's got good eyes and zone coverage. You're going to need that in Buffalo because Buffalo is a very multiple defense, in my opinion. It doesn't get discussed about enough because under McDermott, under Leslie Frazier, they'll play their split safety coverages. They'll play their single high coverages. They'll get into man. They'll pressure with man pressure. But you got to be able to do both. I think you get that with Elam, who has that first-round traits. And I'm not surprised at all he went in the first round. We start going throughout the draft process. There's a couple of names I thought for Buffalo at that spot. Obviously, Elam was one of them. Andrew Booth from Clemson. Kaiir Gordon from Washington, two corners right there who went on day 2. But Elam has higher level traits and more upside in this league because of the size, because of the speed, and because of what he can do making plays in the football.
And one of the things we found out after the fact was that the pre-draft process, I mean, Elam came into his interview with the Buffalo Bills, and I mean, he was a mature professional player who was ready for that interview. He talked about self-improvement, taking notes about what teams did against him, what receivers had success, why they had success, one things he could do. I mean, his note-taking ability and his command during the interview process, I mean, it just screamed exactly what the Buffalo Bills want in all of their players, let alone a cornerback who could be a number 1 cornerback in the near future.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've said that before. If you're going to play for Sean McDermott's football team, you need a high-level football character and a professional approach to what you do. And obviously, I'm not in the building with you guys, but you can see it in the way people play. Okay, I've always said that. When you watch the tape, especially defensive tape, you can understand that there's an established defensive culture, an established defensive identity. There's no question Buffalo has that, and especially in the secondary. We already talked about Micah and Jordan, but also Tre'Davious White and professionalism they play with, the technique they play with, the fundamentals they play with, their speed to the football, the way they tackle. That's all a part of it, and that's a great veteran room to put a young cornerback in because he's going to learn immediately from those veteran guys and learn how to play Buffalo Bills football.
Last one on Elam, Matt, because you mentioned his length and his size and his aggressiveness. We've seen the Bills over the last 3 or 4 years when they've had to play Kansas City every year. They've tried just about everybody under the sun on defense against Kelsey in a matchup situation. They've tried Milano. They've tried Poyer. They've even put Tre'Davious White on him at times. Could Kaiir Elam, with his height and length and aggressiveness, be a potential option that might actually work against Kelsey?
It's a great question, and I think it's a good idea because look at how other teams played Kansas City this year. I'll bring up one. Cincinnati, when they went to their dime, which is 6 defensive backs in the field, they used Trey Flowers, who's a corner, who's 6'3", and has got the length and can get aggressive with the tight end in terms of Travis Kelsey at the line of scrimmage. So that could be an option when they do play their man coverages to put Elam on him, because I'll tell you what, he's got the confidence and the competitive traits to do that in a one-on-one situation.
And then they came up in round 2, pick number 63. They jumped up and got James Cook. Brownie and I really started talking about him that day, the Friday of the day 2, but that before that night began, as a guy that all these receivers were getting taken. If there was a run on receiver, they weren't going to get one. Cook is a guy who is, and I know we make this, and I know it sounds crazy, but to give people an idea of what his skill set was, we said, hey, this is a guy like Alvin Kamara, who can line up as a wide receiver. He can take handoffs in the backfield, very nifty out of the backfield, can take the handoff and go between the tackles, can outrun guys at the edge. As a real versatile running back with a big-time aspect of wide receiver in his game, we thought, both Brownie and I thought, man, this is a guy the Bills might grab. And certainly it ended up being that.
Yeah, and I agree. You're not comparing him in terms of the player profile to Alvin Kamara, but the deployment you are. And Greg Cosell and I really both like James Cook because of how you can deploy him in an NFL offense. I agree. Coming out of the backfield, he's going to create matchups against linebackers all day. There's no question, whether it's running a choice or an angle route, bursting to the flat, what he can do after the catch in the screen game. But then you go through his tape at Georgia, and you'll see that they flexed him outside the formation. And that's where I think he can be really an offensive weapon for this football team. You can flex him to the slot. You can put him out wide. And again, that gives you a tactical advantage from an offensive perspective. You walk that running back out there split wide to the backside of the front side of the formation. Someone's got to walk out there with them. You're going to find out real quickly who it is if you like the matchup. And also, it's going to tell you from a coverage tendency perspective what the defense is playing based on your formation. I think as a runner, you can feature him on perimeter schemes in the NFL. What does that mean? Toss, outside zone, some stretch schemes, because he's got the vision. He's got the short area burst to get up to the second level, and he can hit it now. He can hit it when he gets north and south. I love the pick, especially looking at offense like Buffalo, who I think is very QB-centric. What I mean by that, the offense is built through Josh Allen and what they do in terms of both the pass and the run game. Now you're adding another offensive weapon who has really dual threat ability at the running back position that can create matchup advantages for your offense. I love the pick. I love it.
People were like, they didn't get a receiver until round 5, and we'll talk about Shakir in a second because I think he's a sleeper in this class. But Cook, who they take at the bottom of round 2, I would argue he still fits the bill in terms of diversifying the Bills' passing game.
Well, look what they tried to do during free agency.
Well,
We
right.
saw it right there.
McKissick, yeah.
They're trying to get McKissick. So they obviously wanted a running back with pass catching traits, and not just a running back to run swings and unders. Okay, that is fine at the running back position. But if you really want to threaten defenses, you want a running back who has pass catching traits and really some wide receiver traits to his game, based on deployment, based on formation and alignment, and that's what James Cook gives this offense.
I asked this question of Brandon Beane a minute ago. We've talked about positionless defensive players, safeties, linebacker, hybrids. On offense, you get guys like Deebo Samuel's making a name for himself, doing a lot of things, obviously having a wide receiver skill set, but then moving back, lining up in the backfield. It puts a lot of pressure on a defense to make decisions about who they're going to cover and how. And a guy like Alvin Kamara and like James Cook, that seems to be maybe a trend on the offensive side as well, where you get a guy who can, be a running back but have wide receiver skill set.
I agree. And again, you mentioned Deebo Samuel, how he's utilized. Patterson in Atlanta as well. Don't forget about the pre-snap scheme touches, the manufactured touches, where you can use James Cook on a fly sweep or a jet sweep. You can use him on a bubble screen. You can use him on a reverse. That gives your offense more options. That creates more stress for your defense. And again, where they are lining up doesn't necessarily mean how they're going to be utilized in that specific play.
All right, so flipping it over to the other side of the ball, Terrel Bernard, their third-round pick, little undersized, but seems to have really good diagnosis skills. And the size, I only worry about it if they can't. Like, I'm not saying he's going to start this year. You got Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano, for goodness sakes. But in the event that he gets on the field at linebacker, as long as they keep him clean, he's 100 tackles. It's a given.
Yeah, I agree with that. He's got sideline to sideline range, like I like to call it second level range. He can diagnose the run game. I think he's got the foot quickness to match up with running backs out of the backfield. And you have to remember with Buffalo, no one in the NFL played more snaps of sub-package in terms of having 5 defensive backs in the field last year than the Buffalo Bills. That was their base defense last year. Okay, so you start projecting for the future. I agree with you. He's not going to start over Milano and Edmonds this season. He's going to be a depth player for them this season. If someone misses a game or two, he can step in and be a starter. But immediately he helps you on special teams. Linebackers and defensive backs who you draft, especially on day 2 and day 3, have to be impact special teams players for it. One that helps with development. Steve knows this better than anyone. You have to play at top speed. And I think that is the ultimate teaching tool. But in terms of what he can do defensively, when you're playing with 2 linebackers on the field, can he drop the hook to curl and close the football? Yes. Can he read it out and get a jump on the ball in terms of the run game? Yes. Can he match underneath to a running back? I believe he can. And then when you're talking about tight ends, and it's not necessarily true man coverage against a tight end, but can you get to that bottom hip, carry up the field on a seam route or a corner route when you have safety help over the top? I think he gives that to you as well. So that's a depth pick that fits what they want at the linebacker position. And I think it fits the modern day linebacker position, having versatility to defend both the run and pass game and to be a core special teamer for you as well.
And then we get to what was really the most surprising pick by the Bills. They trade up 20 spots to get Khalil Shakir. Talk a little bit about what you think his skill set is. And, Brandon Beane has already talked about, how valuable they thought he is and they were going to get him with their 4th-round pick that they traded away to jump up. So talk a little bit about Khalil Shakir.
I think he's a football player. That's the best way to describe him, right? He can do a lot of different things for you. I don't remember what his 40 time is. I don't care. I don't have his exact measurables in front of me. Again, I don't care because you can turn on the tape and the guy consistently makes plays. I think he's tough. I think he plays with a physical element. He's got enough top end speed to separate. He's got some nuance in terms of his route running ability. You look at Boise State, how he's utilized. He did everything for him. We're talking about James Cook, right? And how he can be deployed. Think about Shakir in that offense. He can run the fly sweeps. You can put him in the backfield to release underneath to create combination routes for your offense. I think he's tough. He'll work the dirty areas of the field. What I mean by that, that's between the numbers. And Steve, when you go between the numbers in the NFL, it can get a little tough in there. There's a lot of traffic to work through, a lot of bodies around there. I think he's a perfect fit for that, what they want to do in terms of middle of the field throws, the ability to produce after the catch, what he's going to give you on special teams, because that's a guy I would immediately target if I'm the special teams coach in Buffalo and say, what can he do for us on our 4 core special teams? Because I know he's going to give max effort. And again, I just go back to, I think he's a football player. You find places for those guys on your roster because they will compete, they will produce, they will block in the run game, they'll do everything that's asked of you. And he's got enough plays on his college tape and said, this is going to transition to the NFL in the right system. And they put him in the right system in Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, his time speed at the combine was 4.43, which is pretty good. He also has 3 siblings that all ran track in college. But as you mentioned, Matt, he was used all across the formation, and it's interesting that that's the case because Beane, about 4 hours after drafting him in his wrap-up press conference after the draft, basically said they could envision him as their number 4, basically backing up all 3 spots in the starting lineup. That was the same role they gave Gabe Davis as a rookie. So once I heard that, my ears perked up a lot. I mean, they just drafted the kid 4 hours ago. I think it just speaks to what they believe his processing and his football IQ is, right?
I do 100%. Any wide receiver who can play all 3 spots, you have to have very high-level football IQ. There's no question about it because the demands put on you to know every spot. And again, that goes back to versatility. I use the term multi-dimensional traits when talking about the secondary earlier in the show. But that applies to every position, especially skill position. And with Shakir, you're talking about someone who has multi-dimensional ability within your offense where you can play the X, you can play the Z, you can put him inside in the slot. And then we talked earlier about the creativity he can bring in terms of the manufactured or scheme touches. You find ways to get players like that. You want the football in their hands, and you work extra as a coach to come up with creative schemes to do that.
Can we infer anything from all of these wide receivers being taken, and really not just in this last draft, as Brownie alluded to, there are more receivers taken than any other position virtually. And the last 3 drafts have been the same. I mean, they've been wide receiver heavy. Teams are getting immediate impact from their wide receivers. And Brownie's made the point as well. There were like 6 or 7 teams last year that carried 6 or 7 receivers on game day.
Or at least on their 53-man roster.
And certainly on their 53-man roster. Do you sense a trend that way of maybe on game days more and more teams just saying, forget it, we're spreading them out, and we're going to deal with the pass protection by getting rid of the ball quick because, everybody's kind of getting rid of it quick now anyway. Are they just going to say, listen, let's give our guy more options and spread the defense out so it's easier to read? What do you think about the trend and maybe the evolution of the game going that way and maybe too far that way?
I don't know if it's going to go too far that way, but you bring up a good point because the last couple of years on the matchup show, when we went through the draft process, and yes, you have your boundary X wide receivers, right? You're going to have your X wide receiver. You're going to have your Z in your slot. We talked about that. But the wide receivers now that are more versatile, like Shakir, we call them motion movement targets. Okay, and motion movement targets are the players that can play a couple different wide receiver spots. They have that flexibility to where you can give them handoffs in the backfield. You can get them loose on screens and jet sweeps as well. So I think that's part of that, Steve, is you're having more versatile players at the position. You're carrying more in your roster. The one thing I would say is you can't forget about special teams. So you have to have wide receivers that can also cover kicks. They can play gunner, can be a jammer outside, can block on the front line of kickoff return, or have dynamic ability as a returner. If I'm building a roster, yes, I want it to be deep at wide receiver, but once I get past really wide receiver 4, if I'm going to carry 6, the number 5 and 6 better be very high level special teams producers for me as well. But I do think the league is trending to where it's going to be 11 personnel. We're seeing more 10 personnel. We've seen it in Buffalo before when you have 4 wide receivers in the field. So yes, the game is getting more spread out. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the safeties and the corners. How you counter that, you have to have versatile players there as well.
Talking with ESPN NFL analyst Matt Bowen. Last one I've got for you, Matt. Concerns the corner from the small program, Villanova, Christian Benford, FCS level. But, when you're looking at a smaller school kid, you want to see him stand out. He did in terms of the accolades he received. What is it about his game that you think is going to give him a shot at the NFL level?
You bring up a great point about someone at a lower level. You look for size, traits, and production, right? You expect him to make plays. If he's going to be an NFL draft pick and he's playing at a lower level, he should stand out when you watch out the tape. It should be a couple plays you say that guy looks like an NFL prospect. And I think you saw that with him. A lot of on-the-ball production. And what I mean by on-the-ball production, guys that everyone talks about interceptions. I understand that. He had a bunch of PBUs last year on his college tape. Obviously, he had the interceptions. He's another corner, guys, who's 6 foot plus.
Yeah.
Right? And that's like we talked about where the league is trending. You want corners to have some length. 1, to be able to play press, but 2 is to make plays in the football. And when you're a long corner and you're breaking, let's say, a 15-yard in breaker and you're funneling it from outside in, you have to have that long reach and that long frame to make a play on the ball. If you don't, you can secure the tackle and go on to the next play. And that sometimes you need that. But you have to be able to make plays in the football. On his tape, he made a bunch of plays. So I go back to the size, the traits he has to play in a pro secondary, especially in this Bills secondary, and plus the production he put on tape and how he looks on tape. You see, that's a draftable prospect. And I think he went in the range where I expected him to. And that's another depth move from Buffalo. I've always said this, Steve, you mentioned wide receiver. I don't think you can ever have too many defensive backs. I don't. Right. With the amount of sub package that Buffalo plays, playing an extra game in the season, what they provide in terms of being a 5th or 6th defensive back in the field, but also your special teams unit, you can never have enough defensive backs. Never, because matchups change. We talked about earlier with Elam. Could he be a tight end matchup player? Well, when you draft young players, you start to think about that. Are they exclusively an outside corner? Can we play him inside? Is there a certain tight end that they can match up to? Is it a flex tight end that always plays in the slot that we can match him up to? Then you start to develop him in a veteran defensive back room. I think it's a really strong pick and someone that you can grow within your own system.
How likely is it that a player, and we talked about it a lot in the lead up, this is a really deep and talented roster in Buffalo. The expectations in Buffalo this year are higher than any team in the league. They are absolutely expected to go to and compete for the Super Bowl. How likely is it that, guys like James Cook and Elam, all these guys, Terrel Bernard, Khalil Shakir, Matt Ariza, certainly Ariza will probably be on the 53. How likely is it that the guys behind those guys, the Christian Benfords of the world, will be on this roster, at least on the 53-man roster? Certainly they're all candidates for the practice squad. But how hard is it? I mean, you've seen it. Good teams, it's hard to make 53-man rosters.
It is, but that's what you want, right, Steve? You want competition at every position. And I agree with you on the expectations. When the team goes out and signs Von Miller, okay, that tells me that you are putting together a team to beat Patrick Mahomes, to beat all the high-level quarterbacks in the AFC, because you believe you have a win-now roster that can win the Super Bowl. If I'm making a pick right now, and again, we're not even in mini camps or OTAs yet, but if I'm making a pick right now for the AFC, there's no question it's the Buffalo Bills. There's no question. Based on what Josh did last year, and I know they didn't get the win against Kansas City, but I thought that game for Josh was the defining game of his career so far. Defining game. Because that put him in the group, and it's also the entire season of tape. But that game right there, I said, Josh Allen's a scheme transcendent quarterback. What I mean by that, someone that can function and produce in any offense you want to design around him. He can do it. That's up there with Patrick Mahomes. That's up there with Aaron Rodgers. That level of play. And then you add Von Miller, you go to this draft class right now that will make it even more competitive. And that's what you want. You want to draft guys that can come in and push veterans, for playing time immediately, because that's going to make training camp this much more competitive environment, much more high-level energy environment. And then you're going to have better practices. You're going to have more competition to get on the field in the preseason games. And you're going to build a stronger roster, because you're going to need that roster to get through 17 games. And when you get to the postseason tournament, that AFC is loaded. It is loaded. So you're going to need as much depth as you can.
Matt, thanks for all the insight. We appreciate it. We'll catch up with you down the line, all right?
Thanks, Matt.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. Go Bills.